Now, typically when I introduce some of these guests, I like to do a little bit of research, obviously, into what makes that person tick and where their interests are, what types of books they write. What I loved about Carole's story was that although she's written nearly around 30 books, I believe, her career as a writer didn't start until she was nearly 40. So that gives me hope because I'm 34, so I've got 6 years to go to become a writer. On deciding to become a writer, Carole completed an arts degree at Victoria College and majored in creative writing and Chinese language. After that, she completed an associate diploma in professional writing and editing and is sitting here today as a 4-time multi-award winning author. One of Australia's acclaimed master storytellers. It's a wonderful title there. That was actually, I found that on a number of different websites. Carole Wilkinson brings history to life through her creation of characters from ancient times and through the skillful telling of the true tales of history. Her hugely popular, I should stand back from the microphone, shouldn't I? Her hugely popular Dragon Keeper trilogy relates to the mythology and mysticism of ancient China, and her, I hope I pronounce this right in front of a room full of teachers, her, is it Ramones? Yes. Close enough. Series follows the adventures of Egyptian Prince Ramses. Carole has also written 4 books for the widely used non-fiction Drum series and has made the study of history accessible to very young readers with the publication of The Night We Made the Flag. Carole has a long-standing fascination with dragons and is interested in the history of, well, pretty much everything, as I found when I went through these websites. She's passionate about inspiring a love of history in her young readers, with her inspiration to write drawn from extensive research and a personal interest in past eras, ancient times, medieval buildings, and interesting people from times long ago. In 2012, Fromelles, a story about the Battle of Fromelles and the men who took part in it throughout World War I, was shortlisted in the 2012 Children's Book Council of Australia Awards. So without further ado, and without wasting any more of your time, I would like to introduce you to Carole Wilkinson.
Now I'm going to have a go at being down here because back here it seems like an awful long way away. But I've got my cheat sheet, which I stupidly printed out in very small font. So I might have to keep putting my glasses on. So I'll apologise in advance for that. And it's not going to make very good video footage, I'm afraid, with me. Maybe I'll leave them on. You'll be a bit blurry, but... So, look, I wanted to start off by talking about... Well, first of all, I wanted to thank Fiona for her lovely introduction. I want to thank Sue, who's been my go-to person and looked after me, preparing me for this forum, and to Sonia and everybody at the school, of course, who have put on this great festival, but in particular this forum. And I have to say, before I start, that teachers and librarians are always my favourite audience, and I absolutely, truly mean that, because I was saying to somebody before who was talking about my Ramos books, and really they've been around for a while. You can't find them in bookshops anywhere, but they still keep selling, and that is all down to you guys. Absolutely. So I love librarians and teachers. So it's a pleasure to speak to you all today. So I thought I'd tell you first of all about how I got interested in history, because I've never studied history at all, ever. Now I figure, you know, I did my primary school education in England, and my family emigrated when I was 12 to Australia. I figure I must have done some history in primary school. It made absolutely no impression on me whatsoever, because I can't remember any of it. I vaguely remember that I did 1 year of secondary school in England before we emigrated. I vaguely remember doing something about the ancient Romans. I absolutely, definitely did nothing in Australian high school. I did the entire, you know, I went right through in Australian high school. I did no history whatsoever. I didn't choose the subjects, you know, I didn't ever understand that I was in control of my own education, I guess. I just did what I was told. Somebody said, oh, look, Carole, you've done chemistry and history in England. You used to do that. I went to a very academic school. And so I ended up doing science subjects. I did Latin, I did physics, I did chemistry. Well, Latin was good, but not because I had any particular interest in it. It's just the way it went. And so as Fiona said, I ended up not becoming a writer. I was a laboratory technician for many years, and so it was a while before, you know, a long while really, before I figured out what it was I wanted to do. And I guess in my early days, I did have an interest in history. And I was thinking, when I was preparing this, you know, I love to go and look at, particularly when I was still in England, like to go and look at castle ruins and that sort of thing. And I thought, where did that interest in history came from? And is Fred up there? Yes, the first slide. And the only thing I can think of, it was, I don't know if any of you are as old as me and remember Robin Hood on television, a half-hour British TV show, which really had very little to do with history. But this, I loved it, you know, this really intrigued me. And I actually, where I came from, the town of Derby, is actually, you know, very close to Nottingham and Sherwood Forest. So there's a bit of local interest as well. But this, I credit this as being my introduction to history. So next one, thanks Fred. And there was another one about Ivanhoe it was. So that's a very young Roger Moore. That was his first TV role. And so both of these TV series were set in the 12th century. And both of them had some very loose historical connection that, you know, King Richard had gone to the Crusades, Prince John was trying to usurp the throne, and that was in the background. So there was a little bit of history, but really it was folklore. But I think that this is what interested me in history. So as I grew up, after we'd emigrated, I did go back to England after I got married, and lived in London for a couple of years. And I just was absolutely obsessed with seeing everything that was old in London. You know, I just wanted to look at everything that was historical. But my interest was kind of unfocused because I didn't have that background of knowledge really of how history had unfolded. I just went and looked at random things, and I guess how I solved the problem of how I engaged with history was I became a family historian, and that was what began to make me think about it within a framework of history. I could see how my own family emerged from history, and later I did my husband's, and he's got the whole gamut, you know, descended from 3 convicts and on one side of the family, and William the Conqueror on the other. So, you know, I loved engaging with history in that way. But it was quite a long time before I actually stumbled my way into writing. It was no plan. It just, you know, as I said, I never realised I had control over these things, and it was only kind of like a midlife crisis, I think, when I decided, okay, I've got to get out. I've enjoyed all my science jobs, but this isn't really what I want to do with my life. What do I want to do? And I did an arts degree, and I did sign up for creative writing, so I must have known that I wanted to be a writer. It just wasn't anything I'd actually articulated. It was like it was something deep down inside that, because I came from a working class British family where there was nobody who did anything creative, that it just never occurred to me as an option until I was 40 years old. Even then, it took me a while to work out that my talents lay in writing for kids. I went through all the, you know, writing deep and meaningful short stories for adults, and getting many rejections, and it was a while before I actually found my niche. And thanks to many people, including my current publisher, who I gave, she was an editor back in the days, 20 years ago, and we had a mutual friend, and this mutual friend said, Carole, give me your manuscript. This is a novel I'd written for adults. And she said, Carole, give me your manuscript, I'll give it to my friend. And okay. And this woman, Mary-Ann Ballantyne, she said, Carole, I think you should write for kids. And she was absolutely right. This is you know, the skills that publishers had. She recognised in my attempts to write an adult novel, I was actually writing an adventure story, which, you know, adults don't, you know, frown upon these days. And, you know, I like to write a page-turning story. And I don't know about you, but I don't know about members of your book club, Sue, but members of my book club feel manipulated if there's a page-turning story. They think this is not good literature if you want to know what happens next. Truly. So when I thought, okay, this woman said, Marianne, she said, I'm doing a book, a series of teen books, and if you want to give me an idea of what you can write, I can offer you a book. So I'm thinking, a teen book? I've never thought about writing a book for teenagers, but I did, and anyway, that's how I came to writing. And I then did quite a number of educational titles, school reader books, and most of those had historical themes, and that's where I began to realise that this was my niche. And the Ramos books were the first non-fiction, the first fictional books that I wrote, and yeah, I've just kind of fallen into that. I feel privileged, really, that I've met the right people at the right time to point me in the right direction, because I wasn't smart enough to figure it out myself. What's I going to say next? So I think that the problem was that back in my day, at least, I mean, I'm very old, I went to primary school in the 1950s, that history books, whenever I might have come across them, I certainly had some encyclopedias and things at home, that they presented history in a very dry way. And I was trying to think of a suitable metaphor, and the one I came up with, it's like pressing flowers, in a scrapbook. So that it was like historians took these big events, the big chronology of the day, the battles, the kings, the generals, and all of that, and squashed them in between the pages of history books like a flower. So a pressed flower can give you some idea of what a flower looks like, but really, to know what a flower looks like, you've got to see it growing, you've got to see it blowing in the wind, you've got to be able to see it when it's a bud, when it's a flower, when it's opening up, when it's wilting and the petals are falling off. You've got to see the whole thing. And I think history has got to be like that as well. And this is why I think that Robin Hood and Ivanhoe, they were, for all their faults, for all their historical inaccuracies, they told stories. And I think that this is the way to get kids interested in history, is to tell them stories. And so, look, I don't want you to think that this is how I thought this through. I didn't. I always write what I want to write for myself. So I wanted to write a book about a novel about ancient Egypt. I just thought it's an absolute, gift, really, the sort of things that are available in ancient Egypt to build a story around. And I was absolutely surprised, really, when I started to write them, that there weren't lots of other authors who'd done the same things. I mean, you'll know from your own libraries that the shelves are groaning with books on ancient Egypt, that they're mainly non-fiction books. There's very little fiction even now, I think, that's set in ancient Egypt, and so it surprised me. I thought, I don't know why people haven't done that before. So the thing that I really love about history is that, unlike, I mean, people think that it's dead, that it's finished, and it isn't. History is not finished. And I think we're all beginning to understand this now because of the great TV programs and what have you. That history, I guess when I was a child, I thought that somebody wrote down history as it was happening. It was like a diary of the world somewhere. And so that the facts, the absolute undeniable facts, were written down in order, and so we all knew what had happened in the past. And it wasn't until I was much older and I started to actually do the research myself that I thought, no, that's not what it was like at all. Maybe in modern history and back maybe a couple of centuries, there's been plenty of recorded stuff, but really for older and certainly for ancient history, it is a collection of clues that people have found and they have put together like a jigsaw puzzle. So they'll find, somebody will dig some archaeologist will dig something up, somebody looking through archives will find original primary source documents, that will tell another part of the story. Might be paintings that will help us to envisage what things look like. And you kind of put these things all together, but there are always gaps. It is never the whole story. And historians really guess how they all fit together. And whenever there's a new discovery, and that this is the great thing, people are always discovering new things. New documents are coming to light. Archaeologists are finding new things. There's new technology that can do all sorts of DNA testing and examination of under X-rays and that sort of thing, of paintings that have paintings underneath them, all that sort of stuff. So there's always new stuff coming up to this very day that changes history. So history is not this dead, finished, dried up, squashed in pages thing. It is an evolving topic that I think is very vital and very alive. And that's what I like about it. So I thought that I would tell you a bit about how I find the stories in history for my own books. But I don't want to give you the idea that I start off with the thought that what I'm trying to do is encourage children to be interested in history. That is not what I do. I start off with the idea that I want to tell a good page-turning story, always. The story always comes first. And I do this because this is what I like to do. I tell the stories that I am interested in. So particularly with the fiction, I have always chosen the fiction stories myself. I go to my publisher and say, hey, I've got this idea about a story about a girl and a dragon in ancient China. What do you reckon? And fortunately, they usually say yes. The non-fiction tends to be often chosen by the publisher. They'll say that we really want to do a book about Ned Kelly, a non-fiction book about Ned Kelly. Carole, how do you feel about that? And I always say yes. Whatever it is, I always say yes. because I know that as Fiona said, I've often said that I'm interested in the history of everything because once you get into it, it is fascinating. So I've been asked to write books that I would never imagine. I have books like The History of the Modern Olympics, which is another one of the drum stories. I am not a sporty person. I'm not interested in any. I do watch the cricket occasionally, but that's about it. But the Olympics as a movement, sport, as a span of history, it's fascinating how things have changed. And so even that, it was a pleasure to write. And now I watch every Olympics, from go to woe when I'm writing notes in case they want me to do an update for the next one, which they have up until now. So, and it's all the themes, the drug taking and that sort of thing started long, long ago before it was even illegal. People were taking stimulants and all kinds of bizarre things back, 100 years ago they were taking the women's involvements, how there were no women involved in the Olympics. They were banned, in fact, and gradually sort of snuck their way in until finally, just now, right now, there's about 50-50 women and men, and it's taken all of that time. So there's fascinating themes in all of those things. So I will now, next one, thanks. So I'll talk to you a bit about Dragon Keeper. Now some of you probably in your libraries have got a different cover. How are we going for time? Somebody will have to give me a yell if I'm getting towards the end. Yes, thank you. So as I said, when I wrote Dragon Keeper, the only idea I had was I really wanted to write a book about a dragon. I'd done a lot of research about dragons and dragon mythology the first thing I ever wrote, which is a script for a telemovie. And I thought, right, if I'm going to write this script about a dragon, I'd really like to not just make up my own random dragon. I'd like my dragon to have some characteristics from myth and legend. And so I started on a 10-year journey then of doing dragon research, which I just became obsessed by. I thought I'd like to know every myth and legend that there ever was about dragons, and I didn't realise that there were so many, and they came from all over the world. And so I did the telemovie, but I kept on doing the the writing, and then I became a novelist. And so eventually, when I realised that I had this at home, I've got 17 lever arch folders full of dragon notes and, you know, books, shelves of books, and I thought, right, people are going to think I'm a bit strange, you know, doing this isn't normally what people do for a hobby. So I'll say it's all been real research for important books, and so I decided, okay, I'll write a novel about dragons. And as Fiona said, I also, as well as majoring in creative writing, I just randomly decided that I would major did a double major, also major in Mandarin, in Chinese language, just because we'd been to China for the holiday the year before. But, you know, it all came together as if it was a plan, and it wasn't. I learned, as well as the language, you do a cultural sort of subject as well, and so I started to learn about China and Chinese history. And so this started to come together. Thanks, Brent. So this is a typical Chinese dragon, nothing like the other dragons in every other part of the world. Every other part of the world, the dragons are evil, fire-breathing creatures in their myths and legends. Absolutely everywhere except for China. In China, the dragons are benevolent. Chinese people love them, or loved them then, because they bring the rain. They don't breathe fire, they breathe mist. So the mist fills, you know, goes makes clouds, the rain comes down. So I thought, yes, I'd much rather write about a benevolent dragon than a fire-breathing one that somebody's trying to kill. So I decided to write my story about a Chinese dragon. So this is really, truly, this is all I had to start off with. So the next thing I had to decide was what era in Chinese history, if I'm going to set it in history, will I put it in? And, you know, there's at least 6,000 years of Chinese history I could choose from. So I did a little bit of research, just a coffee table book of you know, the dynasties in China, lots of nice pictures in it. Just sort of flipped through it, read a few things to see what felt right. That's just another dragon, a black one. Just love them. So in the books that I'm reading, I always start with these books with lots of coloured pictures because it kind of, I don't know, there's a connection there, and lots of these pictures end up, you know, sometimes end up being in the book, or that they at least have some contribution. Sorry, I'm turning my back to the camera. I might go over here. So this is, I don't know if you know, but in ancient China, people had very similar beliefs to ancient Egypt, in that they believed that after you die, that your soul hangs around your tomb, and so they build tombs to put stuff in, because they think that they have to look after the soul in the afterlife, just like in ancient Egypt. And so whatever that your family member needed in life, they would need in the afterlife. And if you didn't do that, they would turn into a hungry ghost, and they would, you know, just make your life a misery. So things, your crockery would fly off the shelf, and your crops would die, and, you know, also your family would get sick. So you have to look after, and those sort of beliefs do, to a certain extent, continue today, and that's why they burn money, you know, fake money and that sort of thing in Hong Kong. That's to give to their ancestors. So the only things that we know about really ancient times in China come from what people find in tombs, because it's so long ago, everything above ground is just gone. All the buildings were built of wood, so they just either rotted or mainly burned down, disappeared long, long ago. There's no building left in China from the Han Dynasty backwards. So this, I'm flicking through these lovely, you know, museum catalogues, exhibition catalogues, that sort of thing. This was in a catalogue about, you know, artefacts from the Han Dynasty. And I thought, oh, this is nice. It's a painting on silk. And it actually shows the journey that this woman, the woman who died, her soul went on to go to heaven. And if we look closer, next slide, thanks Fred, there's a dragon, there's two dragons actually, guiding her soul to heaven. Now this painting is 2,000 years old. And the dragon, I don't know if you remember, we quickly went through the other ones. The dragon before, the more modern dragon, as in, you know, only 500, 600, 1,000 years old, didn't have any wings. And Chinese dragons normally don't have wings, but way back in the Han Dynasty, this dragon has lovely wings. And I thought he looked kind of friendly, with those red lips, and looked a bit smilier than the other dragons. So I just kind of thought, maybe I'll set my story here. So it's a pretty random decision to do the Han Dynasty, but it kind of fitted my needs. I didn't want to write about wars. I didn't want to write about hardship. I didn't want to, you know, my main character I knew was going to be a girl, and so I wanted to follow her story. I wanted it to be a time of affluence, but not for her. I wanted her to have a contrasting life to what the rest of the country was going. I didn't want there to be famine and drought and hardship. And I also wanted to avoid Buddhism. Buddhism came from India, so I wanted it to be set before Buddhism reached China. I wanted it to have those old beliefs that come from China. So the Han Dynasty suited me fine. And in fact, I discovered as I read about the Han Dynasty that there was a young emperor who was only 15 when he came to power. So I thought, right, I can use him in my story. I can use this real-life historical person as one of the bit players in my book, which has otherwise got fictional players, fictional characters in it. Now this is where, I'm sure you haven't all read Dragon Keeper. So it's a story about a slave girl and a dragon. And there's a man who looks after the two imperial dragons. The emperor has two dragons, and he's kind of put them miles away on the edge of the empire because he doesn't like them much. And there's a grumpy, lazy man whose title is the Imperial Dragon Keeper. It's his job to look after the two dragons, and he has a slave girl who hasn't even got a name at the beginning of a book, treated really badly, miserable life. She goes hungry, she has to work, she does not only her own work but his as well. And what happens is one of the dragons dies. So this starts the story. One of the dragons dies, and the guy then decides thinks he's going to get into trouble, the dragon keeper, so he wants to get rid of the evidence. So instead of burying it in a big hole, which is what you might think you'd do, he decides to chop it up into little pieces, and he turns it into dragon pickle. He puts it all in a big pot with vegetables and vinegar and spices, and he turns it into dragon pickle. And I didn't make that up. This is where I got that idea from. This is a book called The Annals of the Bamboo Books, which is a 2,000-year-old Chinese history book. And it's fortunately been translated from the Chinese into English. It was translated, a couple of hundred years ago, so it's very old, sort of stilted English. But there is and it tells the legendary history, long ago history that we really think probably somebody made up. Because, in fact, this particular emperor here, he had two dragons. And it says there, on those 3 lines that I've marked, just 3 lines, that there was a female dragon died, and the man whose job it was, they don't call him Dragon Keeper. That's the title I gave him. That he decided he says he privately made it into pickle. And when I read that, I thought, wow. I mean, I'd read a lot of dragon stories at this stage. I had never heard anything like this. The whole concept, it's like, oh, the heel has just fallen off my shoe. The whole concept of turning it into pickle, I just thought it was amazing. So I used that little bit to just start my story. After the dragon had died, I thought that, and so where there's 3 lines there from this ancient book, I wrote a whole chapter. I had to actually get in there and imagine what that would be like. What would it be like to chop up, see a dragon chopped up, and how would this young girl who had to help react, and what would happen next? And so I decided that then the other remaining dragon decides it's time to escape, and he does that, and he wants the girl to go with him, but she goes against her. She doesn't know anything else but the existence that she had. As miserable as it is, she manages it, and so he actually picks her up and carries her away against her wishes, and so that's how their journey together begins. They travel. He wants to go to the ocean, which is right on the other side of China, and so they travel together, and along the way she finds out who she really is, the skills and strengths that she never knew that she had. Thank you. And here she is. This is a statue that I found, a picture of a statue that I found made in the Han Dynasty. One of the things that in somebody's tomb, some guy who had servants, they decided, okay, he had servants in his life, he'll need them in his afterlife, so they make little statues about this high of a servant girl. And you can see her on her knees with her hands in her sleeve, just about to bow down. Imagine her saying, yes, master, no, master. She's looking down because she's not allowed to look her superiors in the eye. So I just love that picture. I've never seen the statue, but this was actually made at the time that I'm writing about. This is as close as I can get to stepping back into time, is to see these images of artefacts that were actually made then. Some guy's thumbprints would be in that, you know. I love it. Next one, thanks. Now, what I did is I then wrote 3 books in that trilogy, and I thought, you know, the girl whose name later on we find her name is Ping. She went through all kinds of hardships and difficulties, and you know, was nearly killed I don't know how many times. And at the end of the story, the 3 books, I thought, okay, poor girl, she needs a quiet life. You know, I'd like to think that she just settles down and has children, and you know. And so I thought, that's it, I'll write something else, and I did. But after a while, I certainly kept getting the emails from kids wanting more. They always want more, no, never enough, you know, they never ask you, what's your next book going to be? It's always, what's your next series going to be? And no pressure. And so after a few years, I thought, well, I haven't really finished with the dragons, you know. Ping's quietly living somewhere, but the dragons actually, I'd said, live for 3,000 years. So I realised, well, I can just jump forward. So I thought, okay, what I'd like is the dragon that's the baby at the end of the 3rd book. I'd like him to be like a teenage dragon, so going through a really difficult stage, and actually runs away from home. And so I thought, okay, he'd be about 400, I worked out, you know. And so I thought, right, what dynasty will I be in then? You know, where will I be in Chinese history then? What dynasty? Well, it turned out that it was a complete time, just 400 years later, the Han Dynasty was over, it had fallen. It was a complete time of chaos and anarchy. That the nomads from the north, different races of people, the tribes from the north had invaded, taken over. There was no emperor, there was no empire. The rich people had, they murdered the emperor and his family, had all moved south out of, you know, what wasn't even part of China then, but is right around Nanjing now. And the rest of the people who didn't have the means to move were all left there, in absolutely living in ruins, you know, with hardly any food and no government, no leadership, and these marauding nomads all over the place. So all of the things that I had tried very hard to avoid in the 1st book, I was stuck in. I was in the middle of war and chaos. And what's more, Buddhism had arrived. So I thought, okay, well, I will embrace these things in this book. I won't change my mind, I'll embrace it. And so my main character in these books, I've written 1 and I'm writing the 2nd one, and I hope there'll be a 3rd in this one as well, is a boy, and he's actually a novice Buddhist monk who finds that he is the next dragon keeper. And he has to deal with this, you know. He's very keen to be a good Buddhist, and how will he balance these things? And he, you know, meanwhile, you know, he's not supposed to harm so much as an ant, let alone a person. How will he survive in a world where pretty much everybody's trying to kill him? You know, there's war. So it's a very different sort of scenario. So this is how I come about my stories. I don't, you know what I mean? They don't just arrive in my head. They come in bits and pieces as things arrive with them. How am I going for time, Sue? 10 minutes, okay. So moving along, thanks, Fred. Isn't he doing a good job? So I'll talk about the most books now. Now, these actually came you know, in my chronology, came earlier. And they're smaller books for younger people. Now, the thing about my stories is I don't write like history tends to be all about the movers and the shakers. It tends to be about the kings, about the generals, about the bishops, the people who have the power to rule over us and, you know, change our lives. My main characters never have any power. They're always either ordinary people or, in the case of this one, the Prince Ramos, who loses all his power. So Prince Ramos is somebody who he was a real person. He really existed. He was the son of Pharaoh Tutmosis I, and he was the eldest son, so he should have been the next Pharaoh, but he wasn't. His younger brother, Tutmosis the second or third, I can't remember now, became in real life became the next Pharaoh. So historians do that thing that they do. They say, okay, what happened? Oh, he must have died young. There's no other evidence, no mention of him anywhere. Just one mention in one temple of Prince Ramos is all there is that history knows of. So I thought, okay, what if there was some other reason why Prince Ramos didn't become the Pharaoh? So I've got like a little hole in history where nobody actually knows any facts. I'm sure the historians are probably right, he probably did die young, but I had an opportunity to place a story within history that I could invent, but I wouldn't change history. So I don't want to change history. I don't want to write an alternative history to what actually happened. What I do is try and place my stories within history where it won't disturb anything else that really happened. So with Prince Ramos, I decided, okay, I'd read a few things about what happened in the families of pharaohs. You know, pharaohs always had lots of wives. They had lots of sons, and each wife wanted their son to be the next pharaoh. And so there was some palace intrigues. There were plots to kill off the older sons so that the next ones could be the next pharaoh. So I thought, well, maybe this is what happened. Perhaps one of the secondary wives tried to kill off Prince Ramos so that her son, who was the one that did become pharaoh, so that he took that place. And what happened to Prince Ramos? And I thought, well, you know, he would be brought up mainly by a nanny and a tutor. He wouldn't have much to do with his actual parents. I think it was a long time ago. I wrote his mother was dead and his father was always away on war. So this is actual facts. And so I thought maybe they got wind of the fact that somebody was trying to bump him off and whisked him away. And next one, thanks, Fred. So where would he go? So the things that I loved, that everybody loves about Egypt, is all of these tombs underground in the Valley of the Kings. I mean, it's such great story material. And I knew that in those days, the Valley of the Kings was a secret. The whole reason why they did it underground is because, you know, the pyramids that they built before to bury their pharaohs was, they were like beacons, you know. Here's all the gold and the, you know, the jewels and everything, you know. And so they all got robbed. They were all robbed. And so they thought, oh, this is obviously not a good idea to put these great big signs up above ground to say, this is where it is, guys, come and get it. So they put them in secret underground where nobody can see them, and that's about the Valley of the Kings. But also, what I read is that the people, the artisans, the people that built the tombs, the people that painted all the beautiful things in, the people that carved all the statues, they lived in the next valley in a village. They also lived in secret. They were not allowed to divulge where they lived and where they worked. It was supposed to be a complete secret so that nobody knew. And so I just thought, wow, this is great. You know, maybe this is where he went. Prince Ramos was a very educated young man. He knew how to read and write, of course. So he gets a job as a scribe, working on the royal tombs. Sees his own tomb, in fact. Sees his own funeral because everybody thinks he's dead. And yeah, so I just took that idea, you know, I love that idea of a secret place of work. They would go home after they'd done their stint there, a few months there. They go home to their families on the other side of the river Nile, and not be able to tell anybody where it was that they'd been living and working in all. So I loved all of that. Excellent, thanks. The other thing I loved is that these are called ostracans. I've forgotten what they're called now. Anyway, they're little bits of broken pot, and they used, the Egyptians used them as like scrap paper. I mean, they could make papyrus, but it was very expensive. And so when they just wanted to write a letter or a note, they would save up all their bits of broken pot, or sometimes they would use the bits near the tombs. They would use the bits of rock that they'd chipped off as they were making the tombs. The type of rock in the Valley of the Kings comes away in small pieces. And so they had these big piles of bits of rock, and they used them to write on. So they would actually use them as for letters. They would send off a bit of pot or a bit of rock, or they could, do shopping lists, and there's lists of, what people were earning. They didn't earn money in those days, but they'd earn 2 fish and a bag of grain and something else. And this is how we know, because people have dug up the rubbish pits and found these just bits of rubbish, but and managed to sort of decipher the writing and figure out what it says. And I just loved all that, and particularly because these all come from that town where the artisans work. These are about ordinary people. So we know quite a lot about ordinary people in ancient Egypt because people have found these things. And so, people would be having almost like lawsuits back and forth about who owns that donkey, and it's mine, no, it's his, and the archaeologists, bless them, they managed to sort them out and link up one, even though they're just all piled into a hole in the ground. They've managed to sort of link them up. And so these things like this, I would just think, I love these. I love the lapis lazuli scarabs, and so I'm going to have one of them in my, and so Prince Ramosa has a scarab. So that's how I put my stories together. Couple of minutes. Okay, flash forward a bit, Fred. Keep going. I just want to quickly talk about the night we made the flag. I don't know if you know this book. This is the closest I've come, I guess, to writing a real history of something. Normally I don't recount historical events, not in my fiction anyway. I don't think this is what happened, and we know what happened, I'm going to imagine that I'm there. But this is the closest I've come to. So it's a picture book. This is the new paperback version. Some of you in your libraries might have the hardback version. It's got a blue cover with a girl's face on it, but it's the same book. So it's about the making of the Eureka flag. And next one, thanks, Fred. Here it is. This is the flag, or what's left of it. That's just been moved to a new gallery, the Gallery of Democracy, or the Museum of Democracy in Australia, which is in Ballarat. Brand new museum. And when I started to again, my publisher wanted me to write. They said, we want you to write a book about the flag, not about Eureka, not about gold, about the actual flag. So I said, all right, a challenge. It's got to be a story, not non-fiction. So at the time that I got this brief, there was a woman called Val Dangery who was actually conserving the flag because it was just about to be put on public display. And so she had to very carefully sort of place it on a backing so that it could be hung vertically without damaging it anymore. And so she did a really close examination of it. She found that the blue background was made out of the sort of material that women made dresses out of back then. That the white cross was made out of the white sort of material that they made sheets out of. Twill, I think it is. Anyway, but the 5 stars, although they're white too, were made of lawn. So they were made out of the sort of thing that women would make their petticoats and underwear out of. Val also found there was a pin, accidentally, it was hand sewn with flat fell seams like on jeans, down the side of jeans. There was a pin accidentally sewn into one of the seams. And somewhere near one of the stars, somebody with an indelible dressmaker's pencil had written the letter M. So these were the facts that I had about the making of the flag. Now there's 2 theories in Ballarat. One is that the tent maker on the goldfields had made this flag, a man. The other one, and this story has been handed down in 3 different families, was that there were 3 women that made it. And it's come down as an anecdote And me being a family historian, I'm thinking I'm going to go with that, you know. So I read about the three women who were on the goldfields, and I needed a child in the story because it was a picture book. And so I thought, the first thing I thought when I actually rang Val up and spoke to her is I thought, okay, who gave up their best petticoat to make the stars? And that was how I found that story. Thanks. So it's the pictures, the problem, I said it was made in one night. I can't remember whether I actually found that out, read that somewhere, or whether I just made that up because it made it more of a, you know, a ticking clock. But this gave the problem for the illustrator, Sebastian Cafaglione. Most of the pictures were at night. So it was a real challenge for him, and he did a fabulous job. So you can see he's looking down on the tents, and you know, the women are up late at night, and this is just the one tent with the light in it. And this is Mary, who was the daughter of one of these three real women. And I looked up their children's names, you know, on the births, deaths and marriages, so I knew what how many children they had. One of them was pregnant at the time that this was happening, so I had one of them was pregnant. And of course, it was Mary who had to give up her best petticoat, which was kept. You know, everything else she had is dusty and grey from living on the goldfields, and she had to give up her best petticoat to make the stars. And it was her that wrote the letter M, because and sewed in her pin, because, you know, Mum didn't want her to do the sewing. She had to go to sleep, but they got so desperate, you know, late at night, they hadn't finished it, had to be ready for the next day, that okay, Mary, you can sew on one of the stars. So that was my story. So that's how I put together history stories. And I just quickly, I know I'm running late, but I did have something else to say that was really important that I can't remember what it was. So I've never been a teacher. I don't start from the point of view of you know, how can I engage kids in history? I think this is probably a good thing. I'm not thinking this has to be an educational book. I'm thinking I just want to tell a good story. And the history, I'm not saying it's incidental because it's what I love, but it's not the main thing. My main thing is I want to write books that kids really enjoy. And so if I can get them interested in history as well, that's great. I mean, I've never actually got an email from a reader saying, that's terrific, now I know all about Han Dynasty, you know. I have had letters from girls of Asian descent who say, you've really taught me something about my culture, which is like, oh, and it's such a scary thought, because is this the only place that you're getting it from me, you know? A big responsibility, really. Of my historical novels, of the ones I've spoken about, the only one, and it's not a novel, that is set in Australia or anywhere, you know, where white people live, basically, is the Eureka Flag. The other 9 books, the 5 actually, Dragon Keeper books, and the 4 Ramos books, there's not a single white person in any of those books. So I hope that what I am presenting, maybe for the first time for some kids, is a non-Anglo-centric history. I don't know if any other author can claim that they've got no Anglo people in 9 books that they've written. So I'm pretty proud of that. I'm saying, again, that's not what I thought of when I wrote it, but I'm kind of pleased that that's come about. Now, there's somebody that reckons they're, you know, occasionally I get people saying that they think they'd like to make a movie out of Dragon Keeper, and I'm thinking, do you realise there would not be one white face in this film? I don't know if they think about it, you know. And my people, as I said, they're not the privileged, they're not the kings, the princes, that they are ordinary people. And if they have privilege, like Prince Ramos, even like Velvet in my new book, which is about kids in a modern high school, the only book I've ever written set in current times. Velvet is a privileged kid, goes to a privileged private school. If I have somebody with privilege, I rip it away from them and I make them stand on their own feet, and they have to look after themselves. So the things that I hope that kids find, I guess that I don't think I'm going to teach somebody about history. As I say, that's incidental. But there are important things in my books that I do always want to have in there. I always say I don't do issues. I don't write books about, you know, anorexia, broken families, all of that sort of stuff. But there are always issues in my books, issues that are important to me, and that is equality, breaking down discrimination, and it's about female empowerment. I don't have any weak female characters. All my girls look after themselves. They save the boys, you know. None of this, you know, like Twilight is one of my... No, I better not say that if you're going to put that. So yeah, those are the things that are important to me.